You're standing in a basement that has no thermostat, no vents, no humming compressor anywhere in the house, and it's 91 degrees outside. Somehow it's cool down here. Not air-conditioned cool, earth cool. Steady, quiet, the kind of cool you feel in your bones before you notice it with your skin. That's the first thing that hits you when you walk into an Amish farmhouse in the middle of summer. No machine is running, and yet you're comfortable. Here's a number that should bother you. The average American household spends close to $3,000 a year on electricity, heating fuel, and water combined. Most of that money is paying for things your great-great-grandparents did for free, using nothing but stone, straw, shade, and gravity. You're not paying for comfort, you're paying for forgetting. I'm not blaming a company or a committee for that forgetting, because the real story doesn't need a villain to be interesting. The real story is simpler and honestly more useful to you. Cheap electricity showed up fast in the 20th century, especially once the Rural Electrification Act reached small towns in the 1930s and 40s, and it solved real problems. But when a solution shows up that fast, people stop teaching the old solution, not because anyone banned it, because nobody needed it anymore, so nobody wrote it down for you. The Amish didn't refuse electricity because they hated progress. Many communities allow certain tools and reject others based on how each one affects the family and the community, not out of stubbornness. But one side effect of staying off the grid is that they never stop needing these techniques, so they never stop teaching them. That's the whole secret. Not suppression, just an unbroken chain of hands passing down a skill nobody else needed anymore. The first time I sat in a farmhouse kitchen outside Sugar Creek, Ohio, the woman of the house pulled a jar of butter out of a hole in the floor. Not a fridge. A hole in the floor lined with stone, with a wooden lid over it. The butter was cold and firm on a July afternoon. I want to show you how that works, and 15 more things just like it, and I'm going to save the one that surprised me most for the very end, because once you see it, you'll wonder why nobody showed you sooner. Let's start with that hole in the floor, because it's the foundation everything else builds on, literally. It's called a cold well, or sometimes a milk pit, and people built these into farmhouse basements for generations before refrigeration existed. Here's how it works, in plain terms. You dig a pit into the earth on the north side of your basement, about 3 to 4 feet deep and 3 feet across. You line the sides with stone or brick, no mortar needed on the interior face because you want air to move slightly through the joints. You build a tight wooden lid, insulated with a couple inches of straw or wool batting between two boards. Then you run a narrow pipe, 4 inches across, from the bottom of the pit up to a shaded spot outside on the north wall of the house. At night, cool outside air sinks down that pipe and settles into the pit. During the day, you plug the outside opening so the cold stays trapped. The earth around the pit acts like a battery, soaking up that coolness and holding it steady. A well-built pit will sit in the low 40s year-round, cold enough for butter, eggs, milk, and cured meat. Materials run somewhere around $40 to $60 if you're already working in an existing basement, and it lasts as long as the stone does, which is to say generations. Next, and this one costs you almost nothing, cross-draft cooling with evaporation. Open a window on the shaded side of your house a few inches from the top. Open a window on the sunny side a few inches from the bottom. Hang a damp linen or cotton sheet across the sunny side window. As warm air pushes through that damp cloth, some of it evaporates the moisture, and evaporation pulls heat out of the air to do it. That's just basic physics, the same reason you feel cold stepping out of a pool even on a hot day. The cooled air drops and flows through your house, pulled along by the temperature difference between the two windows, and pushes the hot air out the shaded side. It won't replace air conditioning in a Louisiana summer, but in most of the country, on a lot of days, it can knock several degrees off a stuffy room for the price of a wet sheet. Trick number 3 is the one that used to sit in nearly every farmhouse kitchen. A cast iron cook stove with a water reservoir built into the side. While you cook dinner, the heat that would otherwise escape up the chimney warms 5 or so gallons of water sitting in a tank welded to the stove's flank. By the time supper's ready, you've got enough hot water for dishes and a wash-up, heated as a byproduct of cooking you were already doing. A good used stove like this runs somewhere in the $800 to $1,200 range in Amish country, and they're built to outlast the people who buy them. I've stood in a kitchen in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, in front of a stove manufactured well over a century ago, still doing its job every single day. Now, trick number 4, and this one solves a bill most people don't even think about, your water bill. Every farmhouse I've visited has at least one cistern, a large underground tank that catches rainwater off the roof. Before that, water goes into the tank. It passes through a simple filter bed, layers of gravel, coarse sand, and slaked lime stacked in that order. The gravel handles drainage, the sand catches particles, and the lime raises the water's pH and helps knock out bacteria and some heavy metals. It's an old idea, the same basic principle behind slow sand filtration systems used in cities for over a century. Building one for a family costs somewhere around $150 to $200 in materials. And the math on rainwater catchment is wild once you actually run it. A 2,000 square foot roof in a region that gets 30 inches of rain a year can theoretically capture tens of thousands of gallons annually, more than enough to take a serious bite out of a municipal water bill, or eliminate it entirely if you're off the grid already. If your property has a spring or a year-round wet spot, Trick 5 is a spring house, a small stone or concrete structure built directly over the flowing water. The moving water underneath keeps the interior at a steady, cool temperature no matter the season, which makes it perfect for aging cheese, storing dairy, and holding root vegetables when your cellar runs a little too warm or cold for them. Speaking of root cellars, Trick 6 is doing one properly, which most modern homesteading advice gets wrong. A real root cellar is dug several feet into a north-facing slope, lined with stone, roofed with heavy beams, and covered with a couple feet of packed earth. Done right, it holds somewhere in the mid-30s to low 40s year-round. Cabbage keeps for months. Potatoes keep even longer. Apples can make it nearly a full year. The average household throws out a genuinely embarrassing amount of produce every year to spoilage, and a real root cellar takes that number close to zero. Trick 7 is ice harvesting, and yes, some communities still do this. In the depths of winter, when a pond freezes thick enough, families cut blocks of ice, haul them to an insulated ice house packed with sawdust or straw, and that ice can last well into the following autumn with almost no melt thanks to the insulation slowing heat transfer to a crawl. It sounds like a museum exhibit, but it's a working refrigeration system that costs nothing but labor and a saw. We need to pause here, because I know what a lot of you are thinking. This is all wonderful if you own a farm, you're in an apartment, you're in a 1970s ranch house with a homeowners association breathing down your neck. You don't have a pond, a spring, or a barn. I hear you, and I want to be straight with you. Most of these techniques scale down. Your basement, even a small one, already sits below grade, already surrounded by earth holding steady around 55 degrees. Section off a corner with a stud wall and some rigid foam insulation. Add a small vent you can crack open on cool nights, put in some shelving, and you've built yourself a partial root cellar for $150 and a Saturday afternoon. The cross-draft cooling trick works in any house with two windows on opposite sides. A small version of the cold well can go in a corner of a suburban yard, dug down a couple feet, lined with cinder block, vented with PVC pipe. None of this requires acreage. It requires a shovel, a weekend, and the willingness to try something your neighbors have never heard of. Let's keep going. Trick 8 is a solar hot water heater you can build in an afternoon. A 55-gallon steel drum, painted flat black, mounted on a south-facing roof or wall, plumbed into your incoming water line. On a clear day, the sun alone can push the water in that drum past 100 degrees. It costs somewhere around $70 in materials and can meaningfully cut your water heating costs, especially in summer. Trick 9, haybox cooking, is one of the most fuel-efficient tricks ever documented, and agricultural extension services were writing about it more than a century ago. Bring your stew or beans to a full boil. Cook it for 10 minutes, then transfer the sealed pot into a wooden box tightly packed with hay or straw insulation. The residual heat keeps cooking the food slowly for the next several hours. No additional fuel required. You use a fraction of the fuel a full stovetop cook would take. Trick 10 is the windmill-powered water pump, the classic multi-bladed style you've probably seen dotting old farms. A modest windmill can pump well over 100 gallons an hour in a light breeze, and the mechanical, non-electric versions built decades ago are still running today with nothing but an annual greasing. Trick 11, weatherproofing windows and doors with a flour and water paste applied to strips of paper, pressed into gaps around frames each winter and peeled off cleanly come spring. It sounds almost too simple, but sealing air leaks is one of the single most effective things you can do for a drafty older home, and this costs pennies compared to commercial weather stripping. Trick 12 is thermal mass using stacked firewood along an exterior wall. It won't match modern rigid insulation, but thick woodpile does add real insulating value and slows heat loss through that wall while doubling as your winter fuel supply, drying as it sits. Trick 13, root vegetable clamps, are the outdoor cousin of the root cellar. Dig a shallow pit, line it with straw, layer in your carrots, beets, and potatoes, cover with more straw, then top with soil. The vegetables stay dormant and fresh from late fall through early spring. No cellar required at all. Trick 14 is homemade lye soap from wood ash. Soak ash from your fireplace in rainwater, and you get a solution rich in potassium hydroxide, the same compound at the heart of soap making. Combined with rendered fat, it makes a working bar of soap for a fraction of what you'd pay at the store. Trick 15, hand-cranked grain mills. A decent mill will grind a pound or two of wheat into flour in a matter of minutes of cranking. Freshly milled flour holds onto nutrients that break down within days once flour is milled commercially, and whole wheat berries store for years, sometimes decades, far longer than pre-milled flour ever will. Trick 16 is lactofermentation, sauerkraut, pickles, kimchi. Just salt, water, vegetables, and a crock. No electricity, no canning equipment, no pressure cooker. Fermented vegetables can last many months and carry beneficial bacteria that most store-bought products lost somewhere along the manufacturing line. Trick 17, a passive solar greenhouse attached to the south side of your house. Beyond just extending your growing season, a well-built attached greenhouse can add real passive heat to your living space on sunny winter days, sometimes several degrees worth, for the cost of the structure and zero ongoing fuel. Trick 18, beeswax candles. If you already keep bees or know someone who does, a single hive can produce enough wax over a season to provide months of clean-burning candlelight, with none of the soot you get from cheap paraffin candles. Trick 19, wood-fired laundry. A cast iron wash pot heated over an open fire, using scrap wood you'd otherwise burn anyway, handles laundry for the cost of nothing but your time, and clothes dried outdoors on a line pick up a very real bleaching effect from ultraviolet light. Trick 20, ice block cooling for a single room. A large, well-insulated block of ice harvested in winter can noticeably cool a small, well-sealed bedroom for hours as it slowly melts, especially paired with the cross-draft ventilation from earlier. Trick 21, a manual hand pump at the kitchen sink, drawing from a cistern or well. It costs a few $100s, lasts the better part of a century, and means that when the municipal water system has a problem, you don't even notice. Trick 22, composting toilets. Not the expensive electric kind. The simple sawdust bucket system documented thoroughly in Joseph Jenkins's book, The Humanure Handbook, first published in the 1990s and still in print. Zero water use, zero sewage cost, and properly composted material becomes safe, usable soil amendment for ornamental gardens after enough time. Trick 23, barrel stoves for outbuildings. A steel drum converted into a simple wood stove will heat a workshop or small barn for the cost of scrap wood, and kits for converting a barrel start remarkably cheap. Trick 24, hand tools built to last. A well-made scythe, hoe, or handsaw bought decades ago is often still in daily use, while a gas-powered equivalent from the hardware store rarely makes it a decade. The upfront cost is higher. The lifespan makes up for it many times over. And now, the one I promised you. Trick 25, and it's the one that actually made me stop and rethink everything else on this list, because it takes something you're already doing, showering, and turns the heat you're currently pouring straight down the drain into heat you get to keep. It's called a drain water heat recovery system, and versions of this idea go back decades in plumbing and energy efficiency circles, though almost nobody installs one. Here's the idea in plain language. Every time you take a hot shower, most of that heat goes straight down the drain and is gone forever. A length of copper tubing, coiled snugly around the vertical section of your drain pipe just below the shower, can capture a real portion of that escaping heat as the warm wastewater flows past it. You run your incoming cold water supply through that coil before it reaches your water heater, so the water heater starts with water that's already been pre-warmed instead of starting from cold. That means your water heater does meaningfully less work to bring the water up to temperature, which translates into real, measurable savings on your water heating bill, month after month, for as long as the coil is installed. Materials run somewhere around $50 for copper tubing, insulation wrap, and fittings. A patient do-it-yourselfer can install one in an afternoon. No permit needed in most areas since you're wrapping the outside of an existing pipe rather than cutting into it. It's one of the simplest, most overlooked pieces of home efficiency I've ever come across, and it works quietly in the background for decades without a single moving part. I want to tell you about a family I met a few years back, not far outside Millersburg, Ohio. An older couple, married more than 50 years, still living in the farmhouse the husband was born in. He told me his father built that house without ever once running a wire to the road, and by the time the utility crews came through in the 1940s offering hookups, his father looked at the payment book they were selling alongside the wiring and said, "No thank you, we already have water, we already have light, we already have heat." He wasn't rejecting progress. He was rejecting a monthly bill for things his family already knew how to provide for themselves. 80 years later, his son is still living in that same house, still drawing water from the same spring, still stacking wood for the same stove, and he told me, almost offhand, that he genuinely doesn't know what his neighbor's electric bills look like because he's never had one to compare it to. That's really what this whole video has been about, underneath the techniques. It's not really about the $40 or the copper coil or the root cellar. It's about the difference between a house that depends on a bill arriving every month and a house that doesn't. Every one of these tricks, on its own, saves you some money, but stacked together they add up to something bigger than money. They add up to a kind of quiet independence, the ability to sit in your own home, warmed by your own stove, drinking water you caught yourself, and know that nothing arriving in the mail can take that comfort away from you. So here's what I want from you. Tell me in the comments which one of these you're actually going to try, not just which one you liked, the one you're going to build this weekend. Is it the cold well, the hay box, Burr's coil, as some folks in Holmes County jokingly call that drain heat trick? I want specifics because writing it down is how you actually follow through. And if you're the kind of person who'd rather learn to do a thing yourself than pay someone else to keep doing it for you, go ahead and subscribe, not to support a channel, but because that's exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Next week, I'm going deeper into food preservation, the specific methods that let a family keep meat and dairy fresh for the better part of a year with no refrigeration at all, including one fermentation method that most modern cooks have never even heard of. You won't want to miss it. The old ways still work. Somebody just needed to remind you.